Hey guys, so this week I want to start out by reading through some of the chapter 22 and 23 to help you pick up on details that as you're reading through or as you were reading through, kind of depending on what order you do things, that you might not have picked up on. We're going to talk about some themes, some of the details about the characters, and about the plot development a little bit, and some of the implied meanings that will be a part of your responses this week on Flipgrid or on your homework. So let's kind of work through chapters 22 and 23 together. I'll be skipping around, but I'll kind of walk you through it as we go. So chapter 22 begins, "It was Jem's turn to cry. His face was streaked with angry tears as we made our way through the cheerful crowd." So note that contrast. The majority of people are elated, excited. And if you did your homework last week and you looked through the courtroom scene, you know that there was no case. You know that Tom Robinson absolutely was not guilty, that Mayla Yule's crime, what she had done was develop feelings for a Black man, which in that society was criminal. And rather than take those consequences and repercussions herself, she blamed him, and her father blamed him. And so he's sentenced to death. Jem is crying because he understands the injustice, and the crowd is rejoicing. Atticus was standing under a streetlight, looking as though nothing had happened. So another thing, those of you who are looking for instances of Atticus not changing or being a stable character, he's not angry afterwards. He's not like showing or demonstrating a lot of response to what had happened. He's just kind of placid, as he always was. His vest was buttoned, his collar and tie were neatly in place, and his watch chain glistened. He was in his impassive self again. "It ain't right, Atticus." "No, son, it's not right." We walked home, and Alexandra was waiting up. "I could have sworn she'd had her corset underneath a dressing gown. I'm sorry, brother," she murmured. Having never heard her call Atticus brother before, I stole a glance at Jem, but he wasn't listening. He would look up at Atticus and then down at the floor, and I wondered if he thought Atticus somehow responsible for Tom Robinson's conviction. "Is he all right?" Auntie asked, indicating Jim. "He'll be so," said Atticus. "It was a little too strong for him." Our father sighed. "I'm going to bed. If I don't wake up in the morning, don't call me." "I didn't think it wise in the first place to let them—" "This is their home, sister," said Atticus. "We've made it this way for them. They might as well learn to cope with it." "But they don't have to go to the courthouse and wallow in it. It's just as much Macomb County as missionary teas." "Atticus, you're the last person I thought would turn bitter over this." "I'm not bitter, just tired. I'm going to bed." "Atticus," said Jim. "What, son?" "How could they do it? How could they?" "I don't know, but they did it. They've done it before, and they did it tonight, and they'll do it again. And when they do, it seems that only children will weep. Good night." I wanted to point your attention to a couple of different things. Aunt Alexandra is not like, "Oh, you shouldn't have gone. You shouldn't have let the children go." And what does Atticus say? Like, "Yeah, kids shouldn't have been there." Jem is 14, and he's devastated over this. And Atticus says, "We've made it this way for them. They might as well learn to cope with it." And so what he's saying is that this is their world. This world of racism, this world of prejudice, this world of injustice, this is the world that they're going to have to live in. And the sooner they realize that and learn to cope with it in an appropriate way, the better. Because if you only show them other things, and he mentions the missionary circle, and we'll get to that in a little bit, what he's going to be saying is that the world that they live in is not all beautiful or good or just. A lot of it is impure and wrong, and we have to understand how to navigate the complexities of the world as well as the good things about the world. And so it's just kind of a note as we've been tracing that theme of growing up, that as you're growing up, it's important not just to be sheltered and naive in the sense that you're only being exposed to things that are good and pure and right and positive and that align with your worldview, but that you're able to process the challenge and the complication of evil and sin in the world as well. and to kind of walk through that. And so in light of that conversation, Jem asks Atticus again as he's trying to cope with it, how could they do that? And Atticus says, I don't know. They've done it before. They did it tonight, and they'll do it again. And when they do, it seems that only children are going to weep. Again, the beauty of childhood is a sense of virtue and a sense of justice that goes away when people grow. The next morning, there's a conversation, and Atticus basically says, like, we're not going to worry yet. We're going to push this trial like beyond just our county court, and we're going to try to appeal it to the state. This happened with the Scottsboro boys trial. They were tried at every single level of court, and so it is possible. It also says, Calpurnia said, Tom Robinson's daddy sent you this chicken this morning. You tell him I'm proud to get it. I bet they don't have chicken for breakfast at the White House. What are these? Rolls, said Calpurnia. Estelle down at the hotel sent him. Atticus looked up at her, puzzled. You better step out here and see what's in the kitchen, Mr. Finch. We followed him. The table was loaded with enough food to bury the family. Hunks of salt pork and tomatoes and beans and scuppernongs. Atticus grinned when he found a jar of pickled pig's knuckles. Calpurnia said, this was all around the back steps when I got here this morning. They appreciate what you did, Mr. Finch. They aren't overstepping themselves, are they? Atticus's eyes filled with tears. He didn't speak for a moment. Tell them I'm very grateful, he said. Tell them they must never do this again, because times are too hard. He left the kitchen, went into the dining room, and excused himself. And he went to town. So the African American community, in sort of this beautiful scene, they brought Atticus everything that they had. And again, this is during the Great Depression. People don't have anything, but they're bringing like their best offering to him as a means of thanks that you see us, and we're really appreciative of that. So it's like a really wonderful moment in the book where we see that Atticus Finch is different than everyone else and that it's appreciated. Okay, so then Dill came, and they just kind of have some children's talk back and forth. When we went to the front porch, Miss Stephanie Crawford was busy telling Miss Maudie Atkinson and Mr. Avery, and they looked around at us and then went on talking, and Jim made a feral noise in his throat. I wished for a weapon. I hate grown folks looking at you, said Dill. Makes me feel like you done something. Miss Maudie yelled for Jem to come there. Jem groaned. He heaved himself. We'll go with you, Dill said. Miss Stephanie's nose quivered with curiosity. She wanted to know who gave us permission to go to court. She didn't see us, but it was all over town this morning that we were in the colored balcony. Did Atticus put us up there as a sort of, wasn't it right close up there with all those? Did Scout understand all the, didn't it make us mad to see our daddy beat? Hush, Stephanie. Miss Maudie's diction was deadly. I've not got all the morning to pass on your porch. Jim Finch, I called you to find out if your colleagues can eat some cake. Got up at 5 o'clock to make it. You better say yes. Excuse us, Stephanie. Good morning, Mr. Avery. There was a big cake and 2 little ones on Miss Maudie's kitchen table. There should have been 3 little ones. It wasn't like Miss Maudie to forget Dill, and we must have shown it, but we understood when she cut from the big cake and gave the slice to Jem. As we ate it, we sensed that this was Miss Maudie's way of saying that as far as she was concerned, nothing had changed. She sat quietly in the kitchen chair, watching us. Suddenly she spoke. Don't fret, Jem. Things are never as bad as they seem. Indoors, Miss Maudie wanted to say something lengthy, and she spread her fingers on her knees and settled her bridge work. This she did, and we waited. I simply want to tell you, there are some men in this world who were born to do our unpleasant jobs for us, and your father is one of them. Oh, said Jem. Well, don't you well me, sir, Miss Maudie replied. You are not old enough to appreciate what I said. He was staring at his half-eaten cake. It's like being a caterpillar in a cocoon, that's what it is, he said, like something asleep wrapped in a warm place. I always thought Macomb folks were the best folks in the world. At least that's what they seemed like. We're the safest folks in the world, said Miss Maudie. We're so rarely called on to be Christians. But when we are, We've got men like Atticus to go for us." Jem grinned ruefully. "Wish the rest of the county thought that." "You'd be surprised how many of us do." "Who?" Jem's voice rose. "Who in this town did one thing to help Tom Robinson? Who?" "His colored friends for one thing. And people like us, people like Judge Taylor, people like Mr. Heck Tate." "Stop eating and start thinking, Jem. Did it ever strike you that Judge Taylor named Atticus to defend that boy? It was no accident. Judge Taylor might have had his reasons for naming him." This was a thought. Court-appointed defenses were usually given to Maxwell Green, Macomb's latest addition to the bar, who needed the experience. Maxwell Green should have had his case. "You think about that," Miss Maudie was saying. "It was no accident. I was sitting there on the porch last night waiting. I waited and waited to see you all come down the sidewalk, and as I waited, I thought Atticus Finch won't win. He can't, but he's the only man in these parts who can keep a jury out so long in a case like that. And I thought to myself, well, we're making a step. It's just a baby step, but it's a step." "It's all right to talk like that. Can't any Christian judges and lawyers make up for heathen juries?" Jem muttered. "Soon as I get grown—" "That's something you'll have to take up with your father," Miss Maudie said. So what Miss Maudie is saying is that it seems, from Scout's perspective as she's telling the story, that they lost, and that was sort of the end of the story, and they're done. Jem is upset. Atticus is going back to work. But what Miss Maudie helps them understand, what Miss Maudie reveals, is that even if there are people who are starting to change the tide of racism, the process of change is going to have to be one tiny, tiny step at a time, because the way that crowd mentality works is that the crowd will rise up and indefinitely consume the one. But even if, and the crowd will even consume 3 or 10 or 20, but the point is, and what Miss Maudie is saying, is that there are tiny steps that it impacts one person at a time, one generation at a time, working together. And in this case, Mr. Heck Tate, the Judge Taylor, and Atticus, and then a few others worked together in order to make a defense so strong that the jury actually had to think instead of react immediately upon their prejudices. So that shows kind of the process of changing the tide. Let's see. There's just some more kind of Scout being childish. But what I want to end this section with, before we move on to chapter 23, is a comment that's going to be connected to your homework assignments. It asks you at the end of chapter 23, Scout and Jem have had a conversation about how many different kinds of people there are in the world. And I want you to summarize their points of view. While this is really just going to focus on chapter 23, because chapter 23 will go into this more in depth, I want you to note that even in this one conversation, we see that Jem and Scout and Miss Maudie and Atticus and Heck Tate and Calpurnia, like, they are different than the rest of Macomb. So even though Macomb is generally generationally the same, and that they have their caste system that we've been talking about, there are idiosyncrasies about the people and their beliefs that stand out as unique from everyone else. And even Miss Maudie calls out the Christians, and she says, even within those who call themselves Christians, we're rarely called upon to actually live it out. And when we are, there's a few people that are willing to, and Atticus is one of them. Nobody else is acting like it. So even within the Christian community of those who are quote unquote Christians, it's important to note today and in the book that different levels of faith, different convictions align more with Christ and have that strong foundation that people are willing to act upon, rather than just say, yeah, I believe in God, but it doesn't change me. There are some people who are truly changed and their lives are transformed so that they live like Jesus. And Atticus is one of those figures.